We're back in Mark 12 today. We told you yesterday that this chapter has a lot of short vignettes of Jesus interacting with scribes and Pharisees. The tension is kind of building throughout this chapter, and that's where we get in today. We're in verse 13, chapter 12. Some people approached Jesus. So then they sent to him some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came to him, and they said, "Teacher, we know that you're sincere. You show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." Okay, let's go ahead and put hold here, Michael. First of all, this word Herodians may help. This is not a religious group. This is a group loyal to Herod, and it probably isn't apparent to us as people of our time and place, Michael, but the ancient reader would have tingled. Their suspicious meter would have gone up when you see the Pharisees and the Herodians coming to talk to Jesus together. This is, I don't know what the modern equivalent is, but these are two groups that don't belong together. And the fact that they both come to Jesus would have very much set off the curiosity meters of the ancient readers.
Well, not only that, but the compliment that is shoveled out right away.
Right, I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, I was just going to, I mean, all of this comes together to that point,
Yeah, and so then, and again, you know how this works. If you have children and when they come to you and hey, how's my dad? The greatest dad ever. And you instantly start thinking, what's going on here? What do you want? And so they butter Jesus up here. "Teacher, we know that you're sincere. You show deference to no one," which is a setup for the question, which comes here at the end of verse 14. "Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" Now, here is where we see what each of these groups brings to the table. The Pharisees are going to hold Jesus accountable. If Jesus says, "Yeah, pay your taxes," then they're going to say Jesus is in league with the Romans. And they're going to tell the people Jesus supports Rome. Jesus says we should give them our money. They're going to kind of spin Jesus' answer. If he says, "No, don't pay the taxes," then the Herodians are going to go right back to the government officials and say, "This Jesus guy is telling people not to pay their taxes. We have to do something." And so once again, the snare is set for Jesus. There's no good answer to this question. They've got him backed into the corner, and either approach that he takes is going to be the wrong one.
Yeah, it's funny because these people who are coming to Jesus are in some ways opposed to one another, and the question that they ask him is one that both of them would disagree with the other side. But there's this unholy truce in this moment to get Jesus trapped. Both of them have, in their own ways, interest in Jesus being caught on the other side of this argument. And that's something that we miss, I think. We don't understand really at the level of the ancient world how quick power structures could be flipped. The Herodians were actually anti-Rome, if you got them boiled down to it. They didn't love the fact that the Romans were there oppressing, keeping order, really, in many ways, stifling what Herod would have liked to have done. But Herod was a puppet king. He reported to the Roman authorities, and it was because the Romans were happy with him being there, they thought that he was a strategic value, that they kept him there. So, ironically, no one in this story would be happy. The Pharisees aren't happy with the Herodians because they're really godless, and the stuff that they're doing is pretty despicable. And then you've got the Herodians, who aren't particularly happy by the stooges over here, the Scrooges rather, the people who hold people back. Nor do they love the emperor because the emperor exacts taxes and has expectations, and yet in this unholy truce, they can catch Jesus, because the one thing that Jesus does to both of them is he destabilizes the foundation of their power. For the Pharisees, he calls them to a different kind of order, a different kind of kingdom. To the Herodians, Jesus makes it clear that he is not seeking a kingdom of the world, and therefore he takes away the power of the ones who seek to rule with earthly authority, to hold on to the power that they have. So this is sort of one of those amazing confluences where you say the stars have aligned and our enemy is the one who, we can be allies because we share the same enemy.
One of the things to look out for, and we see a foreshadowing of it here, all the Gospels do this. Mark does it really well. Matthew does it exceptionally well. There is a kind of joining together of Judaism and Romanism that happens in the late narrative of Jesus. So in the story right around the crucifixion, and maybe from Holy Week to the crucifixion, there are these moments where the people of God, the Jews, side with the Romans. It's most noticeable when at one point when they say, we have no king but the emperor. We have no ruler but the emperor. And the gospel writers put those things in the mouths of the people to show how far they have gotten from the truth of their faith. And so we begin to see that here, that there's a sort of collaboration that begins to happen, and it is intended to point guilt at the religious people. So verse 15, should we pay them or not? But knowing their hypocrisy, Jesus said, why do you put me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me see it. And they brought him the coin. And he said, whose head is this? Whose title? They answered, the emperor. And Jesus said to them, then give to the emperor the things that belong to the emperor, and give to God the things that are God's. And they were utterly amazed at him. We've seen this pattern before. We'll see it again. In fact, we'll see it a few times in this chapter. Their best efforts, Jesus just easily sidesteps them with creativity, with kind of shrewdness, a kind of slyness. You just can't corner Jesus. And so thinking they've done it, they get the tables turned on them. Jesus takes the coin. He says, well, if that's his coin, give it back to him. That's fine. He doesn't answer the question one way or another. Give to the emperor the things that belong to the emperor. Give to God what belongs to God. He sort of implies that you should know the difference. And they have no answer.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot to add there. I would only point out that I think that this continues Mark's larger theme of the kingdom of God. Jesus is not beholden to any particular earthly power, either religious or political. And so when people come to try to trap him on one side or the other, Jesus isn't beholden to either. He's the Son of God. The Son of God isn't particularly interested whose image is on the coin. He was part of making the stuff that made the coin. And Mark points that out here. And in what, the Bible's not always comedic, but there's humor in it. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have some permission here to smile at Jesus upending these well-laid plans.
Yeah, it's always fun, I think, and remains so in TV and movie and media, to see the weasels get what's coming to them. So they get outfoxed here. Then we move to verse 18, a kind of similar story. Some Sadducees, and who say there's no resurrection, came to Jesus, and they asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no child, the man shall marry the widow and raise children for his brother. There were 7 brothers. The first married, and when he died, left no children, and the second died and left no children, and the third likewise. None of the 7 left children. Last of all, the woman herself died. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? For the 7 had married her. We can stop there, Michael. So here's a similar kind of story. There's this group called the Sadducees. The Sadducees, the Pharisees are well known in antiquity. The Herodians are not really a group that we know much about. They're not really accounted for outside of the gospel, but they seem to be loyal to Herod. The Sadducees and Pharisees much more are in the mainstream of Judaism. The Sadducees and Pharisees argue about interpretation of the law and of some theology. One most notable point being mentioned here, the Sadducees say there's no resurrection. So dead is dead. And this is not a thing in ancient Judaism, but as they moved into Jesus' time frame, the resurrection question has come up occasionally in religion. And so the Sadducees pose this ridiculous scenario to Jesus. 7 people, they all marry the same woman, one after another. So Jesus, who's she married to in the resurrection? And again, I think they think that they have Jesus. What can he say if he says, husband number 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, then he somehow disrespects marriage, that he somehow undervalues the covenant. And so they, again, think they have Jesus hooked by this absurd question.
Well, it's also an argument at extremism or extreme. What am I trying to say there? They're taking this argument to the furthest extent possible, and it's ridiculous. But they're trying to make Jesus look ridiculous because they don't believe in resurrection. So therefore, the fact that 7 men and this woman were not able to have offspring would all point to the ridiculousness. Well, if resurrection was true, then how does this work out, Jesus, right? I mean, they're trying to, at this point, not even hardly argue with Jesus. It's merely to just make him look like a fool.
Right, and so then we move to the answer, the resolution of this story, verse 24. Jesus said to them, "Is not this the reason you are wrong, that you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God? For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry or are given in marriage, but they're like the angels in heaven. And as for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the story about the bush, how God said to him, 'I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is the God not of the dead, but of the living. You are quite wrong.'" A little less trickery than our first story. Jesus here takes a more teaching standpoint, also maybe, oddly enough, a more confrontational standpoint. And he says, look, you guys are ridiculous. You're making up these crazy stories, and you don't even know what you're talking about. On the other side of our life, it isn't the same as this. They're not marrying. They're not giving people in marriage. They are like the angels. The resurrection is a spiritual reality. And as for the dead being raised, don't you listen. When God meets Moses at the bush, he claims that he is God of people who are deceased, but refers to them as the living. And so he's the God not of the dead, but of the living. And then, this is kind of a fun, if you're Jesus, this is a fun way to end an argument. You are quite wrong. That's harder for us to do in theological arguments, but when Jesus does it, that has a way of ending the conversation.
Right. And I'm only going to just sort of, in summary, point out that we're implicating in these two stories pretty much everybody. You got the Pharisees, got the Sadducees, got the Herodians. The only people who we really left on the table is Rome per se, and they're coming. The centurions, the Pilate. You have them only sort of on the edge here. But what you have is Jesus's relationship with all of the key figures of Jewish life are now implicated in these trials.
Yeah, and the one group that isn't mentioned is scribed, and they're in the very next verse.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about them tomorrow. But yes, and again, Jesus, we're in the shadow of conflict now. So many of the stories are building in the crescendo that is going to lead us to the crucifixion. And Mark has saved a lot of this sort of conflictual material for late in the telling of his gospel, which I think highlights it. in a really good way.
And it's convicting that the closer Jesus gets to power, the more threatening he is to people. When Jesus is in Galilee, far away from the city, people throng to him because of his ability to heal and restore. And in fact, he seems to have, Mark makes it clear that there are crowds that these leaders are afraid of that are with Jesus in Jerusalem. So it seems that Jesus had an ability to connect with people who knew their need. But those who were pretty confident that they had answers to questions, those who show up to Jesus with the trick rhetorical question, they do not get a very positive telling in this gospel or any gospel, to be honest.
And, one of the takeaways, and we won't go long here, but one of the takeaways has always been for me that as church people, we need to have a humility that recognizes and confesses that when you seek truth, it is dangerous to believe that somehow you possess it, that somehow it belongs to you. And the irony that Jesus' conflict is almost always with people who are religious, who are in a faith tradition. Jesus isn't out there fighting with atheists. He's not out there fighting with sinners. His most knockdown, drag-out battles are with self-righteous people who have confused their religion for a true understanding of who God is. And as religious people, that should give us pause in how we have conversation with people, of the depth that we bring. Whenever there's some religious person arguing, for instance, many of you are on the Facebook platform, and you wouldn't have to look very far to find somebody who posted some very simple, shallow religious thing on Facebook as if that settles a matter. And it is always frustrating to me, because we are to be people who have real conversations. The Pharisees don't care about what is true. The Sadducees don't care about this question. They come to Jesus already believing they know the truth, and because they believe that, they can't see the truth that Jesus offers them. And the warning in that Mark gives us is, don't be one of those people.
Yeah, this is a slight abstraction. I've walked away from the text here a little bit, but would it be fair to say, Clint, that what Jesus does in both of these stories is insists that the people of the story matter, not the made-up scenario? So the idea of this woman and the husbands, or the idea of who should we pay taxes to, Jesus walks away from the rhetorical devices and says, no, listen, this is about the God of the living. This is about the God who will raise people up. They'll be like angels, right? Each one of these are about specifically real human concerns, not made up ideas. And we tend to use ideas that reinforce what we believe or want to believe. And Jesus constantly resists that. You got to think of the idea of David going in and eating the bread. He says, right, that the food wasn't made for man, or man wasn't made for food, or man wasn't made for Sabbath. Get your stories right, Michael. But the other way around. Jesus has an accommodation for people that is always disruptive. And I think we should be mindful, especially in those moments where we start using, like you said, Clint, very short, sort of easy-sounding ideas to dismiss the real lives of people.
Yeah, it must have been frustrating to the Pharisees, who thought they could argue Jesus down and submit proof of their rightness to the crowd, and at every turn they're thwarted. So, yeah. Well, friends, thanks for being with us. We will press on tomorrow, and we hope to see you then.
Thank you for joining us for this daily Bible study. If this is your first time, Welcome! We are so glad that you have joined us for this time of intentional study of God's Word. You will find in the description of this video a link to our website. We would love to get to know who you are. We'd love to reach out and greet you personally, but be sure, whether or not this is your first time, to like this video. If you're on Facebook, share it so that other people might be able to find it too. If you're on YouTube, consider subscribing. You'll receive more content like this every day at 2 o'clock Central Standard Time. On top of that, every Wednesday at 9 o'clock, we release a Pastor Talk podcast, which goes through different series, but all of them about faith and life and discipleship of Jesus Christ. Friends, regardless of how many times you've been with us, we hope that this day has been meaningful for you as you seek to follow Jesus Christ. So until next time, be blessed. We look forward to seeing you soon.